You're listening to the Valley Labor Report with David Story and Jacob Morrison.
Welcome back to the Valley Labor Report. My name is Jacob Morrison, here with your co-host, David Story. We had on Chris Brooks. He's a labor journalist. Really enjoyed the conversation with him. We talked in the last segment about some of the protests surrounding George Floyd's murder. And, of course, that's not the only thing. But I wanted to talk a little bit more about that and just kind of back up for a little bit. Because, I've been afforded the opportunity to have a platform in my area, and I don't feel like we could have this show and have a role as a public figure, however minor, of course, extremely minor, without talking about this story, especially given how distorted so much of the coverage has been. And I do want to be sober and careful. So I've prepared a lot about a lot of this, but and additionally, we've reached out to and we'll be bringing on a guest next week, like we mentioned at the end of the last segment, to talk about solutions to these systemic problems with the institution of the police. And yes, they are systemic. The problem is not just one or a few or several bad apples. The institution is rotten, in my opinion. I'm not saying that every individual police is a bad person per se, or that they are necessarily immoral, but the institution that they're a part of is really it's really bad. So just to back up, on May 25th, a store owner called 911 alleging that a black man paid for groceries with a fake bill and appeared drunk. The police arrived and dragged him out of his car, forced him to the ground, restrained him, and one officer knelt on his neck for 8 minutes and 46 seconds. That is a long time. 8 minutes, and that's almost as long as one of our segments, 8 minutes and 46 seconds. Think about having the weight of a man on your neck for as long as we talk in between the commercial break. That's insane. Put us just sit down sometime when you're at home in your recliner or on a chair and set a timer, 8 minutes and 46 seconds. That is insane. And he was pronounced dead less than an hour later. The video is horrifying. The complete indifference to the life of a man being snuffed out live is just sickening. The cop had his hands in his pockets. The next day, 4 cops were fired, but they were not arrested. There were protests. They were mostly peaceful at the beginning. And there was actually remarkable unanimity in the condemnations of the officer from multiple cops and police chiefs. There was uncertainty in the first reports of property damage. The first property damage that was reported actually came from a man that is suspected of being a cop, but there's no definitive proof on that. And the property destruction began to crescendo that night. Target was looted, some buildings were burned, and among the rioting, there was actually enormous amounts of solidarity. Items taken from Target were set up under tents outside and distributed to people who needed them. Multiple mutual aid groups have come to the assistance of people who may have been inconvenienced by the protests. And all of this is happening while the police involved in the murder were not arrested. They were just let roam free.
Yeah. And it makes you question the honor and integrity of a person that is willing to do that to another human being. Mm-hmm. And not just the honor and integrity of that person, but the other police that stood around and watched it happen.
There were 3 other police there.
Yeah, and nobody said anything. and just allowed this to. And what I said earlier in the week on social media is the sickening part of this whole episode is the fact that had it not been recorded,
right,
every one of them would have got away with it. And that kind of speaks to the whole policing issue in general. Not saying, and we continually reiterate, and I don't think we should have to, but we do, because we're dealing with the public and in a lot of cases, a lot of people that have this thin blue line mentality. But we continue to reiterate the fact that the police are not really accountable to us. They're accountable to their hierarchical police chiefs, who may be accountable to the mayor of that city, but there is no accountability in that. And this whole idea of policing for profit, or there being a crime against the state, is absolutely sickening to me.
Right.
I don't think there is no crime. In other words, growing a marijuana plant in your backyard should not be a crime against the state. Who in their right mind thinks that is an infringement, that growing a plant is an infringement on other people's rights?
Right. Well, you know what? The talking about policing for profit, the police took more property from people than burglars did last year.
Yeah.
Yeah, in the civil asset forfeiture, it's insane. And and people, they don't like to hear things like the institution of the police is corrupt. But think about that there was one man who was sitting on the neck, and there were 3 that just let it happen. And then after that, for nearly a week, the entire police department did not arrest him. They would tell you that they were waiting for the warrant for his arrest, but they don't have to have they don't have to have a warrant for somebody's arrest to arrest them. If they wanted to look good in the public eye, they could have just done it. If I come in somewhere with a gun and shoot somebody, they're not going to wait for a DA to issue a warrant for my arrest. They're going to do it.
Yeah.
And they don't. And so every cop in Minneapolis is in some way complicit.
They're complicit
because they refused to arrest their brother.
Yeah. Yeah, it's the entire institution is it may not be corrupt. Maybe corrupt is a bad term to use, but there's so much protectionism inside there. And it all goes back to the same thing. And it's worth asking the question, how many other people have been done this way that wasn't caught on video?
Because they lied in the police report.
Oh, well, it's new. I mean, because consistent. Every time something like this happens, it's a cover up.
Right.
They all get together and cover it up. Hey, that's.
I mean, just read the police report. Read the police report. They said he had some kind of medical emergency.
Yeah, the medical emergency was a knee was on his neck. That was the medical emergency, that somebody should have gotten the knee off his neck.
And like you said, if nobody had been recording, the police's word would have been taken as gospel.
Yeah.
Nobody would have been fired. Nobody would have been arrested. A man would be dead, and that would be that.
Yeah.
That would be that. And so Friday morning, finally, the officer who murdered him was arrested. The 3 other officers involved have yet to be charged, and protests continue. And now there's been a lot of consternation over property destruction, and I want to make it very clear where I stand. I'm personally uninterested in destroying property. I am not. I'm ambivalent basically on the effectiveness of it, but taking my cue from the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., I'm similarly uninterested in condemning those rioting and destroying property.
The problem is, though, Jacob, we as individuals in this society, as workers, have gone unheard for so long. And like you said earlier, they continue to tell us to vote for the right person, and all of this is going to get better. And it doesn't. And we continue to struggle more and more We continue to get, even though we may get pay raises, they never keep up with the interest, with the inflation, with the healthcare costs and everything else. And all these politicians want to do is tell us, well, if you'll vote for us, we will take care of you. But the fact of the matter is,
they won't.
It goes back to the old saying, the riot is the rhyme of the unheard. And at some point, people are going to recognize that, guess what? This is the only other option I have, is to start making hay in the streets.
Right. People love to quote King on his calls for nonviolence, or to repeat his quote that darkness cannot drive out darkness, only light can do that. But like the rest of his legacy, they leave out the more radical elements, like when he said, a riot is the language of the unheard. And in place of condemnation of riots, he urged America to listen to what the rioters were saying. Folks love to talk about the Dr. King from the I Have a Dream speech, but they don't want to talk so much about the Dr. King who vehemently condemned militarism in Vietnam. How do you think he would respond to increased militarization of police today? We're going to be talking some more about this after the break. This is the Valley Labor Report. Stay tuned.
We are all born free, but forever live in chains, and we battle to existence on and on. We'll take whatever comes to be while keeping hopeful melody, and we'll cruise through the darkness until the warmth of dawn. So roll, roll, you bastards, you never can tell.
Welcome back to the Valley Labor Report. My name is Jacob Morrison, here with David Story, my co-host. When we left off, we were talking about Dr. King and the distortion of his legacy. And so just continuing on that, folks don't want to talk about the Dr. King who condemned the economic system that allowed people to be so poor while some have more than they could ever know what to do with. They don't like to talk about the Dr. King that called for a radical redistribution of economic and political power, or the Dr. King who supported reparations and affirmative action. His legacy has been whitewashed. So I am uninterested in property destruction personally. I'm not advocating for it, but I'm also uninterested in the economic plight of a multi-billion-dollar company, corporations like Target. They have insurance. They're going to be fine. And if you're truly worried about the economic plight of the small businesses who have become collateral damage in the wake of righteous fury of protesters, there are GoFundMes out there that you can contribute to, and you can advocate for government assistance. There's no stopping these city governments, these state governments, the federal governments from stepping in and making these small businesses whole. And there are. I've seen some, and it's sad. Might I suggest a good place for the funds to come from would be police budgets. However, from the words of one small business owner in Minneapolis, he said, "Let my building burn. Justice must be served." So if you're sharing memes of Dr. King to condemn the rioters, if you're using the riots to dismiss their anger, you're wrong. You're misrepresenting his legacy, but more importantly, you're missing that sometimes property destruction is the only form of protest left. Like I said earlier, that's exactly what the Boston Tea Party was. It was property destruction. And now people that take on the mantle of the Tea Party think that property rights are sacrosanct. We need to learn our history. That's not violent. It's destructive. It's not violent. And like I said earlier, the only violence that we have actually seen has come from the cops. The protesters, I have not seen an instance of the protesters hurting another human. I have seen them burning buildings, burning police cars, breaking windows. But I've seen cops throwing small women against the concrete, throwing them into seizures, having them go into the ER. I've seen cops run by in their police cars with open doors to hit rioters. I have seen cops shoot rubber bullets at news crews. I've seen cops arrest news crews. But I've not. So I've seen the cops be violent. I've not seen the protesters be violent.
A good question would be, who is violent? I mean, who threw the first stone?
Right.
You know, and you have and I recognize Dr. King advocated for peaceful protests, and I think a lot of that was based on biblical the New Testament, but at the same time, violence begets violence, and and when you have a person killed in the streets,
right,
there is going to be retaliation for that. And like you said, I have no problem with the people burning the cop cars. I mean,
right.
It's at some point this overbearing state, and I think both liberals and conservatives can get on the same page and recognize that this state is overbearing. And at some point, their voting is not working. Peaceful protests are not working. This continues to happen. So what is there has to be an escalation. And so naturally, this is the next step up. Nobody, like you said, there's been no violence. There has not been a police executed in the streets yet. No. So, I don't know where it stops.
Right.
But maybe the state and the police should take a deep look at themselves before it continues to get worse and get worse.
Right. So, and look, you can't argue with the results. The officer is now in jail, and the DA has said this is the fastest that a cop has ever been charged with anything in Minneapolis. And so, I don't know, maybe after a few more police precincts burn, the rest will be in custody and we can see some real change.
Yeah, you would think so, but you say you can't argue with the results, but you can, because we continually see the killing of minorities in America over and over and over again. So you can argue with the results. Yeah, okay, so this one police went to jail, but what happens next month? Right. What happens in 2 months? Because you've had the black gentleman in Ohio in the Walmart gunned down by the police because someone made a false call to 911 saying that he was pointing this BB gun at people. Gunned down, not even questioned.
Yeah.
The gentleman that was in the car with his girlfriend and her child gunned down because he had a cell phone in his hand.
Right.
So you can argue with the results, but we're not getting the results that we want.
Right. And the next thing that about this that I felt is important to talk about, and it's the most chilling thing that has come out of the last week, the threat by the President of the United States of summary extrajudicial killings of protesters who engage in property damage. The President said, "I can't stand back and watch this happen to a great American city. Either the very weak radical left mayor get his act together and bring the city under control, or I'll send in the National Guard and get the job done right. These thugs are dishonoring the memory of George Floyd, and I won't let that happen. Just spoke to Governor Tim Walz and told him that the military is with him all the way. Any difficulty and we will assume control, but when looting starts, the shooting starts."
That is an important point to make.
That's
when
that's a fascism.
Looting starts, shooting starts. So basically what they're saying is, once again, we're going to use violence.
Yeah.
Let's don't go in and peacefully have a discussion with these people and address their grievances. Let's just start gunning them down.
Yeah.
When the looting starts, the shooting starts. I mean, it's a sickening statement.
I mean, that's a fascism. And he tried to walk it back, saying that was meant as a statement of fact and that the looters will start shooting or whatever. But, I mean, no one believes that.
Everybody knows what he was saying.
Everybody knows what he – and that phrase, the phrase literally was used by segregationists in the South as a threat against protesters as well. When the looting starts, the shooting starts. There's no way he did not mean that as a threat, and I do not believe a single person who says they believe him. They're lying to you. I don't believe it. And so this is not just about George Floyd. This is about Ahmaud Arbery, who was murdered by vigilantes. This is about Breonna Taylor, who was murdered in her sleep by the police. This is about a Huntsville woman a couple days ago who was pulled over for a minor traffic violation, who drove for 3 miles, that's not a very long time, to find a safe place to stop And that, just driving for 3 miles, was enough reason for multiple police officers to come and pull guns on her. I have driven for 3 miles because that is something that my father told me to do. He said, when a police tries to pull you over, never pull over by yourself. Always try to find a well-lit place in a parking lot with multiple witnesses so that you have... Never just pull over by yourself. Don't try to impede traffic. This is just common things, and it was enough because she was black, and multiple officers came there. There were 3 cop cars, and they pulled guns on her. This is in Huntsville, Alabama.
Pulled guns. What's the threat? What is the threat?
This is about systemic abuse that goes back to the very foundation of this nation. We've had hundreds of years to make things right, and we haven't. So I'm not going to lose any sleep over the destruction of a police precinct or a target. Instead, I'll see it, I'll hear it, I'll stand in solidarity with them, and hope that the people in power finally wake up and see that something must be done. And not just about this situation. I'm talking about fundamental changes. Arresting and prosecuting these 4 officers will not stop there from being another George Floyd. Arresting and prosecuting these officers will not stop there from being another Breonna Taylor. There have to be massive changes to the institution of police in America. The problems are systemic, and it is.
The problem is the love for authority in this country.
You know,
this whole concept, and it's only happened in the past 20 to 30 years. When I was a kid, it wasn't this whole thin blue line thing, and this entire movement to glorify authority. And that's kind of what we were talking with Chris earlier about. You know, we recognize authority, but we didn't glorify it.
Right.
They have their place, but their place is not on a mantle being idolized. Their place is right next to us, if not a little bit lower, because they are public servants.
Yeah, you know, I understand it's a hard job. I do. It's not the 3rd most, or the 5th most, or the 10th most, or the 15th most. I looked this up last week. It is the 16th most difficult job in America. And the 15 jobs that are more dangerous than them, when they get in trouble, they don't get to shoot people because they have problems. They don't get to kill people because they're afraid.
Yeah.
And you know, these problems are systemic. They close ranks. They don't allow oversight. They drudge up old crimes of their victims to tar their reputation in the public conscience, the no angel narrative. And, you know, the cops didn't they had the authority to arrest this person, and they didn't. Instead, they set up an army outside of his home to protect him. Last year, like I said, cops stole more from people than burglars did with the civil asset forfeiture. It must be the institution has to be radically transformed, because a system that allows this amount of injustice it just can't be allowed to continue as it is. They are in these protests showing contempt for citizens and contempt for the free press, arresting identified journalists, shooting rubber bullets at them. I found myself constantly, while all this is happening, while they were being violent to protesters, violent to news crews, I constantly was thinking to myself, where are the good cops?
You know,
where are they?
I was watching Unicorn Riot last night. A big shout out to those guys for covering these protests like they should be covered. And they interviewed one of the gentlemen that the police were firing tear gas at him. Mm-hmm. And so the gentleman had a 5-gallon bucket of water, and as the tear gas would hit the ground, he was grabbing it and throwing it into the water to put out the tear gas. So as soon as the tear gas got shot, he grabs it, throws it into the water. The number of shots was unknown, but he said he had went to the hospital, and they said they had identified about 7 places where he got shot with rubber bullets. You know, so it's like, where you want to know where the violence is? The violence is coming from the state.
Yeah. They've got to be demilitarized. They need more oversight. They need their guns taken away. There need to be less of them. Next week, we're going to be talking to Alex Vital and his book, The End of Policing, about some of the solutions to this. This is the Valley Labor Report. We got one more segment. Stay tuned. Welcome back to the Valley Labor Report. My name is Jacob Morrison, here with my co-host David Story. We've spent the show mostly talking about these protests, and so we're going to wrap up talking about them and talking about protests in general. But
we spent more time than what we originally intended to do, if we're being completely honest with everybody.
Right. But just to kind of wrap up my thoughts there about these protests and the police in general. We've really got to look at some systemic, fundamental changes to the institution. They need to be demilitarized. They need more oversight. They need their guns taken away. There need to be less of them. They need to have less jurisdiction. We can't tell the police to solve every problem in society. That's not what they just can't do it. They need their budget slashed. The power of police unions have to be countermanded. The AFL-CIO needs to disaffiliate from law enforcement unions and more. And like I said, we're going to be talking more about the solutions next week with Alex Vital. He's the author of The End of Policing. He's been studying the police and criminology for his whole career. He's a professor at the University of New York in Brooklyn. So I think that'll be a really helpful interview for both of us and for the audience, because David and I have really have strong feelings about this, and we do have, David especially has some experience with the police and what they actually do, but we've not been studying this for our entire. That's not the focus of our careers, so to speak. And so I think it'll really help us. It'll help the audience think about some things in a different way. In the meantime, justice for George Floyd, justice for Ahmaud Arbery, justice for Breonna Taylor, Black Lives Matter, and uncritical and unwavering support and solidarity for the people on the streets that are protesting for real change.
Yeah, solid. Yeah, more important than anything right now, solidarity with all the people on the streets, because there's beauty in the streets. And when we put the show notes together, we had no intention of spending this amount of time on it, but it's important. It is important. I think it's something that needs to be addressed. Not just, we need to recognize what's happening in the minority communities in America. And, and specifically one minority community that's been here for hundreds of years, building this nation, the Black community.
Well, and, it is important to say it's not just the minority communities that are affected by police brutality in the police state and state violence. I mean, poor whites feel it too. It's it's not just Black folks that are the victims of this. It's
working class people.
Yeah,
it is working class people.
Upper middle class white folks generally not too much, but if you're homeless and white, like you've had run-ins with the police.
Yeah.
If you're a white working class person with dreadlocks, I worked with a person in a restaurant, and he was a respectable looking white guy, when I knew him. But at one point, he had dreadlocks, and he said that while he had dreadlocks, every time the police pulled him over, he had to wait for hours for them to bring the K-9 unit to search his car for drugs. Every single time.
Yeah.
When he had dreadlocks. That's,
and that's one
insane.
of those things that we talked about, the state had, a problem with the state, and truthfully, it all begins in the legislature. The legislator continually writing all of these laws, and we talk about the nanny state, and I know especially conservatives love to talk about the nanny state, because they want to to portray it as it's all liberal. But the fact of the matter is the nanny state is driven by the conservatives as well on the Sunday alcohol sales or drug violations and things. Right. They just pick and choose their own nanny state that they prefer to.
Yeah, maybe daddy state would be the better word for that. But yeah, and the historical roots of the police in this country and in other countries were not to fight crime, and even today they do a really not a great job of it.
They're reactionary.
Most theft goes unsolved, and most theft goes even uninvestigated. In fact, and the roots of the police are in slave patrols, are in strike-breaking Pinkertons who murdered workers that were on strike.
Yep.
Yep. You
well,
know,
even you were talking about earlier in the week on Means TV, the fact that the union time with the Smithfield Company in North Carolina, they were approved, and we have a church in Birmingham that's been approved by our legislature now to have their own state endorsed police department inside. And Smithfield was the same way. 26 police that they had in Smithfield, privately employed by Smithfield Farms, that had the power to arrest workers. It is overwhelmingly oppressive on the working class people. In the same way, we were talking about during the break with all of my brothers and sisters that were on strike 2 years ago. The company actually hired Morgan County sheriffs to come out there and watch us for 24 hours a day. They paid for out of our labor, Morgan County sheriffs to come out there, and they constantly harassed us on the picket line, pulling up there, flashing their lights, threatening to take us to jail. And the one thing that pissed me off more than anything else throughout that whole time was we were never violent.
Right.
But we had a car. No, we never destroyed anything. We cleaned up after ourselves.
Right.
We were out there sweeping, picking up the bottles, improving the front, believe it or not, because we didn't want to portray it as in a bad light.
Right.
But the fact of the matter is, when one of the guys that was, and I get it, he was a scab. He was crossing the picket line. He was scared because we were out there yelling at him. Hey, let's build some solidarity here. He come through the picket line at roughly 20 to 30 miles an hour and missed one of my brothers from down south by less than a foot. I mean, it would have completely demolished him, and the police did nothing.
Yeah.
They sat there and did nothing.
Yeah. Yeah, and another more contemporary example, 2 years ago is really contemporary, but just a few months ago, we saw a wildcat strike at the University of California, Santa Cruz, for graduate student workers who were striking for for a cost of living increase. And the university said they didn't have enough money in the budget for that, but they had enough money to pay California cops $250,000 a day for weeks to sit on the picket line, harass the students, and $250,000 a day. And they didn't have the money in the budget to pay these graduate student researchers a living wage, but they had enough money for $250,000 a day for cops.
Yeah. Hey, we appreciate you listening to us this week. I hope it wasn't, too dull with all of the protests, but
yeah. Thanks for listening, folks. If you want to keep up with us throughout the week, follow us online, facebook.com/Valley Labor Report, YouTube @The Valley Labor Report, Twitter @Labor Reporters. If you appreciate our work, donate to us, patreon.com/The Valley Labor Report. See you next week.
WVNN Athens, WVNN FM Trinity, a Cumulus station. It's 11 o'clock. News starts now.
Special report, Minnesota protests. I'm Christopher Cruz. For the first time in its 164-year history, the Minnesota National Guard has been fully mobilized. It's a response to violent protests in Minneapolis last night. Governor Tim Walz today said he estimates 80% of the people who committed violent acts during the protests are from out of state, and he's had it.
We built this state. We built the North Star. Everything that we believe in, these people are trying to destroy. So if you are on the streets tonight, it is very clear you are not.
Thanks for listening, folks. If you want to keep up with us throughout the week, you can follow us online. We've got a Facebook page, facebook.com/Valley Labor Report. You can search us on YouTube @The Valley Labor Report. We're on Twitter @Labor Reporters. I'm on Twitter @JacobM_AL. David is on Twitter @Radical Unionist, RADICL Unionist. If you appreciate our work and want to ensure that we can stay on the air, consider supporting us with a monthly donation on Patreon @patreon.com/The Valley Labor Report.